So if you are told from a young age to not cry, don't be a sissy, man up, grow some balls, right? Like those kinds of things. If that's what you are repeatedly told as a young boy, certain characteristics and qualities like compassion and empathy and vulnerability, those are sort of like methodically driven out of boys from the media, from peer culture, right? From the men in their lives. And this is all so that young boys and men can appear to be as masculine as possible, right? So it's about wearing a mask, okay? Because of course we know young boys and men, they do have vulnerable feelings. They do have emotions. They do have compassion and empathy, but the culture says that those things are not manly. And so we police young boys, right, through these things. And so you'll see that notion of policing on the right side of this figure. What we have in the middle of the figure is the man box. So those are what goes in the man box are the qualities and the traits that I've said a few times now. So that strong, aggressive, hyper competitive, like gets the girl, right? Doesn't talk about emotions. Anger is the only real emotion that, you're allowed to exhibit, those kinds of things. So that's what we're basically, literally think of this box as a metaphor. From a young age, we are stuffing boys into this box, okay? And as they grow older and older, and as those voices of men in their lives, as the media, as peer culture starts to play their role as socializing agents, what ends up happening is that the boys become further and further embedded into the man box. And when you're getting that positive evaluation from peer culture or from the men in your lives or from media, then you're going to continue sort of exhibiting those traits and behaviors and qualities. And so the implications of the man box, and remember, I said, I'm not saying all young boys do this, all young men do this, but the reality is these pressures exist for young men from a very young age, okay? The notion of don't cry to a young boy starts from being a toddler, right? If a little boy falls down and starts to cry, oh, don't cry, you're so tough, what are those tears, right? We reinforce what it means to be masculine from a very young age. So the implications of sort of, figuratively, metaphorically being stuffed into this man box. You would have the inability to access a full range of human emotions, right? A lot of young men, and now when I say young men, I'm sort of talking about the young men who are mostly, your age. I was going to say our age, your age, sort of early 20s, late teens, right? If all of these feminine traits, and I've said feminine with air quotes, if all these feminine traits are driven out of young boys, then what's left is the traits that are associated with being a real man. And so you may then, as a young man, have the inability to access your full range of human emotions because they have been methodically driven out of you by various socializing agents from an incredibly young age. And if you don't have access to your full range of emotions, that's going to place limitations on your roles and your relationships. And I'm not just saying romantic or sexual relationships, just generally the relationships you have with people in the world, the roles that you have within this world. Because of course we know that fostering empathy and compassion are so important, especially right now, right? When there's someone leading the states who has zero of those qualities. He actually in many ways represents the very hegemonic definition of what it means to be a real man, as awful as that seems. Okay, so if you can't access your full range of emotions, that is going to place limitation on your roles and your relationships. And if those two things happen, how are young men ever going to be their authentic selves? right? How are young men ever going to be their authentic selves if what's presented to them as masculine are not their own authentic original ideas? They're ideas that have been placed onto young boys from media, from peer culture, from the men in their lives. I'm gonna show you a clip after you watch this from a documentary called The Mask You Live In. Usually I like to show quite a bit of this documentary, but unfortunately we don't have access to it through the library database. So you're just going to watch this 7-minute clip. What it essentially is showing is the implications of the man box, okay? So I want you to really bear those implications in mind when you're watching this 7-minute clip.